Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be talking about the DJI FPV system after 8 months of use. Yes, time flies fast, and with all of the deals and price reductions I'm seeing, coupled with the number of people who are switching to the DJI system, you might be feeling under pressure to invest yourself. So, as someone who got my hands on all of it from the beginning, I thought I'd do an update on my experience, because there are some things that it does great, but there are areas that need improving and some limitations that could possibly always be there. So let's start on the subject of completely switching to digital, because it's not something I've actually done. I still use my Fatshark HD02s for analog. When the DJI system was released, it didn't take long for people to claim that they were ditching analog entirely. But if you do that, then you are cutting yourself off from the really small sub 30 gram analog indoor tiny whoops, which have been a saviour for me this year. And it could be that the DJI system never gets small enough to fit a proper 65mm tiny whoop. There's also the power issue. Many countries and race events are limited to running with a max power output of 25mW. And whether you are using the stock antennas or even upgraded antennas, running the DJI system at 25mW is only fun in open fields or open indoor spaces. Once you start flying around dense objects, the video signal becomes unpredictable and scary. So, at a guess, the people who have completely switched to digital are more than likely flying at full power, which is fine if you're flying on your own, but not so great at official race events or with a group of mixed analog and DJI setups. So what about the analog mod on the DJI goggles? Can you have the best of both worlds? Well, it's definitely good enough for casual analog flying, and it's come a long way since the goggles were first released. But I still find myself reaching for the HD02s when it comes to analog. Perhaps I'm just spoilt, but the OLED panels on the HD02s look more fluid and give a better picture. It also lets me switch from a 4:3 aspect ratio to 16:9, whereas up to today, the DJI goggles are stuck in a 4:3 aspect ratio for analog. They have been making a lot of updates though. For example, they have recently added the ability to zoom in and out or move the analog picture around the screen, as well as adding the goggles battery voltage. So I can see them eventually adding the option to switch aspect ratios, but there's a known issue if your analog model is using a PAL camera, where the screen will reset and go blank for a fair few seconds if the analog video signal is completely lost. Now, I've not experienced this myself, probably because I use the rapid fire module, so the image never completely disappears, but it's something that still needs fixing. The DVR is a higher quality than most goggles have, but it still suffers from a slight bobbing in the recorded footage, which also needs addressing. When the goggles first came out, a big complaint was the amount of light leak some people were getting through the sides. DJI have addressed that with their new thicker foam pad, which I have here, but you still have to buy it separately. Personally, I think it should come as standard if it works better. I still get a little bit of light leak through the nose, but I don't find it too distracting. You have always been able to wear glasses underneath the goggles, but my glasses kept rubbing against the eyepiece, potentially scratching them. So luckily, DJI have released corrective lenses from -2 to -8, which I've installed. Next, I want to talk about a question that I get asked a lot, and that's whether you should buy the DJI Controller. And I think it's because there are some deals out there that include the controller. So to get the DJI system up and running, you need at least the goggles and either an air unit or a Cadex Vista. You don't need the controller. You can use your own separate receiver and controller if you already have one, which can drastically cut the cost of your setup. And if you don't already have a hobby grade controller, then I'd worry about someone completely new to the hobby throwing down that amount of cash on an entire DJI setup. But I have the controller and find it a huge benefit because it binds directly to the air unit or the Cadex Vista, so you don't have to mess around with a separate receiver or worry about more antennas. You can bind to as many of them as you want and it remembers them. The USB port now acts as a joystick, so you can use it with an FPV simulator, and it runs off the same 5.8 GHz frequency as the video feed, so its range is about the same. But on the flip side, it doesn't bind to anything else, so you can only use it with the DJI gear, and the transmitter doesn't have any trims. It also can't be programmed, so you can't have any custom rates. If you want to do anything clever like that, then it has to be done through software like Betaflight or iNav. And I haven't found this to be a problem yet, but because the controller works on the same 5.8 GHz frequency as the Air unit or the Vista, if someone plugs in an analog setup on a similar channel, then it will shoot down both your video and control at the same time. Now, when I fly with other people, we are very careful to make sure this doesn't happen. But if you use a separate controller on, say, 2.4 GHz or Crossfire, then you would just lose your video in that scenario. But I wouldn't be quick enough anyways to lift the goggle up before the model crashed, so it's not too much of a problem, but it's worth bearing in mind. So in short, only get the DJI controller if you are comfortable with the fact that you will need a separate hobby grade controller for anything else that's not DJI. Or if you are fully committed to DJI, then you need to be aware that you won't be able to use it with anything else. Next, I want to talk about the Air unit and the Vista, because you can buy everything separately, although it does seem if you go for a deal, you can save a bunch of money. Now, I prefer the Vista over the Air unit because other than being able to record onboard footage, the Vista can do everything that the Air unit does and more, because it can take a direct success voltage, it's lighter and fits in frames easier. The Air unit does record onboard footage, but it can't compete with the quality of a GoPro Hero 7 or above. So for me, the added weight of the Air unit goes wasted, but the footage recorded to the Air unit is up there with the quality of a Session 5, so if that's good enough for you, then the Air unit might be more appealing. But if you do eventually decide to go down the GoPro route, then your model will end up being really heavy carrying an Air unit at the same time. It can also be quite frustrating finding the right micro SD card for the Air unit as well, because it needs to be fairly new and really fast, otherwise you will get slow SD card errors flagging up in the goggles and it won't record anything on board. They have done a lot of bug fixes on the Air unit though. Some people reported problems with the recording stopping in the Air, which was put down to an issue with the TX and RX feeding DUF data to the automatic recording when you arm the model. So they have added a function to the goggles, and you can now manually start and stop the recording yourself independently from the model. When the Vista first came out, I wondered if it would struggle only having one antenna over the two antennas on the Air unit. But after flying them both, I can only guess that they over-engineered the Air unit, because I haven't noticed a difference in performance between the two. The Air unit has two antennas because the DJI system uses a method called cyclic delay diversity, which sends or resends packets of data if they haven't been received correctly. But it seems like this system is just as effective through a single antenna on the quad. Which brings me neatly on to the next subject, because when this system first came out, it only took a couple of weeks before companies started releasing their own very expensive antennas for it. But I found that they only improved the performance massively when running a lower power output or at an extreme bando, so most of the time the stock antennas are ample if you up the power. So I struggle to justify the cost of aftermarket antennas, especially as the DJI manual advises not to swap them out. But Menace seems to be the only company not asking extortion amounts of money for their antenna pack, and it's effective, so if you do want to upgrade, then that's the package I would recommend. As I mentioned, DJI have been updating the firmware and features of the system since its release, improving it all of the time, which is great, but that can cause some inconvenience itself if you are running multiple setups. I've got about 4 DJI models running either Air units or Vistas, and each time they come up with an upgrade with the firmware, you have to update every single device, otherwise you will get a firmware mismatch error in your goggles. This might sound like I'm being fussy, but it can take up to 15 minutes for each device, including the goggles and controller. And if you have done the 1200 milliwatt mod or manually changed the region, you will have to do that every time you update the firmware as well. Now, I don't think we're going to see a V2 of the DJI system anytime soon, because the V1 still has a lot of things that needs ironing out. And while the SharkBite system is looking promising for the future, I don't think it's trying to achieve the same thing as DJI. So I'll be keeping a close eye on it, but it needs to be out of a beta stage before I put any money down. The DJI system has had some recent updates which might make it more appealing to you. I think the biggest one is the addition of GPS icons icons in the on-screen display, but I can't say I'm fond of how they've dealt with HDMI out. They have made the odd choice of using the DJI Smart Controller to process the video signal via USB. The Smart Controller can only be used to control a DJI Mavic 2 or above, and it costs about the same price as the entire DJI FPV setup on its own. So even if you have a Mavic 2, it's a big ask off DJI from us who tend to spend less than their usual camera drone customer. So unless they come up with a cheaper option or someone finds a way to hack the video out signal, then I can't see many people buying a Smart Controller just for that feature, and it could even be one of the reasons why people choose SharkBite over DJI. There are some things I'd like to see changing which I haven't mentioned, and I don't think are on DJI's radar either. The first one is to have the battery voltage feed directly from the VBAT pads on the Air unit or Vista when the TX and RX isn't connected, so that models without a flight controller can still have a simple display of their battery voltage. I think this would open the system up to FPV vehicles other than multi-rotors. I'd also like to see a way of hard-coding the Betaflight on-screen display to the goggles DVR. At the moment, it only stores the basic information separately to a subtitle file, which you have to overlay in a video editor yourself. It would be great to see an option where you can turn on or off a hard-coded on-screen display. So I hope this video will help you decide if the DJI system has advanced enough for you to pull the plug on it or not. As I mentioned at the start of the video, there are lots of deals on this product at the moment, so I'll try and find them and link them in the video description as well as a pinned comment. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.